This is part 2 of the lecture on social contact. Why does culture influence the interactions in tourism? In this lecture, the following topics will be discussed: contact hypothesis and the factors affecting contact. There's a general saying that travel and tourism are good for world peace. When people travel, they learn about different cultures and become more tolerant and become more aware. Let's examine to what extent is this true. Here you see a typical beachside resort. Could be all-inclusive, meaning the tourist does not need to leave the resort for anything, since lodging, food, drinks, activities, and even souvenirs are available for purchase or covered within the resort. In this scenario, tourists do not interact much with the locals. Furthermore, resorts and destination resorts tend to have fences around the property to keep locals out so that the tourists can have a safe, relaxing experience. So the typical interactions that take place between the tourists and the locals are commercial in nature, they're superficial in nature, they're hospitality based, so the local is always a service provider and the tourist is the receiver or recipient of services. Again, the types of commercial interactions that take place between tourists and locals at a resort. Some spaces where these interactions take place. Could be any destination. As locals are more and more separated from the tourists, they see few benefits from tourism, and sometimes resulting in negative behavior towards tourists, such as street crime, petty theft, etc., or other muggings. So here you see tourist police in certain destinations to protect the tourists from the locals, to keep the tourists safe. Now, these tourist police are members of the local community, usually. So here you will see potential conflicts taking place between the locals and the tourists, and also within the locals themselves, with, for example, the tourist police. Furthermore, tourists objectify locals and view them as attractions, mainly because there are so many barriers, social-cultural barriers involved in tourism. Again, objectifying people. This is an example of a campaign from Israel a few years ago, where the question was, what type of tourists should we be attracting? A question from the locals. Should it be the bikini brand or the Holy Land? And here you see again, perhaps conflicting values and lifestyles of the locals and the tourists. Talking about conflicting values, here is a photograph from Bali a decade ago, where a local group targeted a popular tourist restaurant. Contact hypothesis. Within tourism, when social contact takes place between the tourists and the hosts, the outcomes can be generally either positive or negative. Contact hypothesis. Contact hypothesis. When social contact takes place within tourism, meaning when interactions take place between the locals and the tourists, the outcomes can be either positive or negative. And these could be either appreciation, improved or decreased, same with respect, attitudinal changes in the positive direction or the negative direction, reinforcement of prejudices or breakdown of prejudices, same thing, reinforcement of stereotypes or breakdown of stereotypes. This is mainly attributed to the passing through nature of tourists. Tourists have limited time, sometimes a few days, a few weeks, a month maybe, but no more. That's all they have to spend at the destination. And when we are passing through, there are lots of activities that we need to accomplish as tourists, including relaxation, recreation, some shopping, entertainment, all that squeezed within the passing through time. Again, the kinds of activities that people tend to do, usually removed from local interactions. That's a point that's being made here. So although the tourists have a unique experience passing through, the locals see several tourists passing through the destination and their local communities every day. So the perspective is very different for the local than it is for the tourist. Let's summarize. So tourism contact outcomes are as such. The negatives often outweigh the positives, but advantages outweigh disadvantages. The majority of change takes place in the negative direction, and a little change in the positive direction, usually. And this is mainly due to the economic and superficial encounters that take place between the tourists and the locals. There are social cultural barriers between the tourists and the locals. Therefore, overall, the tendency is to either confirm the positive or the negative attitudes. So you, again, reinforce what you already knew. The factors affecting tourism contact are temporal and spatial. What is the nature of the interaction? Is it commercial? Is it focused? Is it co-presence? How many contact opportunities do tourists and locals get? In the case of gated resorts, very little. And where do those interactions take place? Do they take place in public spaces? Or do they take place within a resort? What are the costs and benefits perceived by the tourists and the hosts of such interactions? What are the resources that are exchanged? It's not always money. Now we have new phenomena like voluntourism, where the resource exchange is hard work in the local community. And what kind of tourists are we trying to attract? The touristic orientation. In addition, the other factors affecting tourism contact are cultural. How familiar are cultures with each other? The tourists and the locals, are they familiar? Are they attracted to each other? Do they have common attitudes or not? What are their perceptions of each other? And then communication, the language that is used to communicate with one another, usually English or Spanish or French. The tourist language is used as the mode of communication, even in the local destinations. And how that language is used is usually in a commercial way. Therefore, these are all the factors affecting tourism contact and also affecting the outcomes of the contact. This ends part 2.